At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law pushed me out of the house. "We're done supporting a blind old woman who's nothing but an expense." My son laughed in agreement. They had no idea who was paying the mortgage. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." The smell of roasted turkey should have filled me with warmth, but instead, it made my stomach churn. I sat at what used to be my dining room table, listening to the familiar sounds of my family around me. David's deep laugh, Jessica's high-pitched giggle, and the soft murmur of my grandchildren playing in the living room. At 68, my vision had deteriorated to the point where faces were just blurry shapes, but I could still navigate my way around this house with my eyes closed. After all, I'd lived here for over 30 years, raised David here, made countless memories within these walls. "Mom, we need to talk." David's voice cut through the pleasant dinner conversation. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. I set down my fork carefully, my fingers trembling slightly. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Jessica cleared her throat. I could practically feel her satisfaction radiating across the table. "Margaret, we've been discussing this for months now, and we think it's time you considered other living arrangements." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Other living arrangements? You're becoming a burden," Jessica continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Your medical bills, the constant doctor visits, having to drive you everywhere because you can't see. It's just too much for us to handle anymore." I felt my world tilting. "But I pay for my own medical expenses. I've never asked you to—" "That's not the point," David interrupted. And hearing my own son's voice join in this attack made my chest tighten. "You're a liability, Mom. What if you fall and hurt yourself? What if you leave the stove on and burn the house down? We can't keep worrying about you." My hands found the edge of the table, gripping it for support. "This is my home. David, I raised you here?" Jessica laughed, and the sound was like broken glass. "Your home? David's been paying the mortgage for years. You haven't contributed anything except medical bills and worry." The lies rolled off her tongue so easily. I wanted to scream, to tell them the truth, but my throat felt like it was closing up. How could I explain that every month, for the past 15 years, I'd been the one quietly transferring money to cover the mortgage, that I'd put the house in David's name, only to protect him from potential creditors when he started his struggling business? "We've found a nice assisted living facility," David said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used when he thought he was being kind. "It's very affordable, and they have staff who can help with your limitations." "You want to put me in a home?" The words came out as barely a whisper. "It's for the best," Jessica said firmly. "We can't keep supporting a blind old woman who only brings expenses. The kids need that room for when they get older. We need to think about our future, not keep dragging around dead weight from the past." Dead weight. The words echoed in my mind. I thought about all the nights I'd sat up worried when David was sick as a child, all the sacrifices I'd made as a single mother after his father died, all the money I'd quietly funneled into this family without ever asking for recognition. "We want you out by Monday," Jessica added. "We've already made the arrangements. Someone from the facility will come pick you up." I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. Around me, I could hear the normal sounds of Thanksgiving continuing. My grandchildren laughing in the next room, completely unaware that their grandmother was being discarded like yesterday's garbage. "I see," I managed to say, though I could barely breathe. "I suppose I should pack my things." "Good," Jessica said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." As I felt my way toward the hallway, David called after me. "Mom, it really is for the best. You'll see." I didn't turn around. I couldn't let them see the tears streaming down my face, or worse, let them see the dangerous calm that was starting to settle over me. They thought they were getting rid of a helpless old woman, but they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed I'd slept in for decades and pulled out my phone. My fingers, still steady despite everything, found the contact I needed. Robert, it's Margaret. I need to see you first thing Monday morning. It's time. The small apartment I rented across town felt like a prison cell compared to the house I'd been forced to leave. 3 days had passed since that nightmare Thanksgiving dinner, and I still couldn't believe how quickly my life had been turned upside down. The assisted living facility Jessica had chosen was a joke, a rundown place that smelled like disinfectant and despair. I'd lasted exactly 6 hours before calling a cab and leaving. I sat in my new living room, surrounded by the few belongings they'd allowed me to take, and tried to process what had happened. The most painful part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how easily David had gone along with it. My own son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, had looked me in the eye and called me dead weight. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Hope you're settling in well at Sunset Manor. David says you left without telling anyone. Very inconsiderate." I deleted the message without responding. Let them think I was tucked away in their discount nursing home. It would make what came next so much sweeter. Robert Mitchell had been my financial advisor for over 20 years. He was one of the few people who knew the real story of my finances, and when I'd called him that terrible Thursday night, he'd immediately understood what I needed. "Margaret," he'd said, his voice grave, "are you absolutely sure about this? Once we start this process, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I'd replied. "It's time they learned the truth." Now, sitting in my temporary apartment, I pulled out the folder Robert had prepared for me. Inside were documents that would have shocked David and Jessica to their core if they'd ever bothered to look. The house they'd thrown me out of? I'd bought it in 1989, 2 years after David's father died. When David turned 18 and started talking about wanting to own property someday, I'd quietly transferred the deed to his name as a gift. I thought I was protecting him, helping him build credit and security for his future. The mortgage payments they claimed David had been making? Every month for 15 years, I'd transferred money from my retirement account to his checking account to cover them. David thought the payments were automatically deducted from his account for a loan he'd never actually qualified for. I'd been the one ensuring the house stayed in the family, but that wasn't all. When David started his landscaping business 10 years ago, he'd needed equipment. I'd co-signed for every loan, then quietly made the payments when his business struggled. The truck he drove, the riding mowers, the trailer, all of it financed through me, all of it kept secret to preserve his pride. And Jessica's precious minivan? The one she used to drive my grandchildren around while complaining about supporting a useless old woman? I'd paid for that too, telling David it was an early inheritance so he wouldn't feel indebted. I thought about all the times Jessica had bragged to her friends about David's success, about how well he provided for the family. She had no idea that her comfortable lifestyle had been built on the foundation of my hidden generosity. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd made myself invisible financially to protect David's ego, and now he saw me as completely worthless. I'd been so determined to let him feel independent and successful that I'd erased my own contributions entirely. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. David's name appeared on the screen. "Hello?" "Mom, Jessica talked to the facility. They said you left. Where are you?" His voice carried annoyance, not concern. Not once did he ask if I was safe or if I needed help. "I'm fine, David. I found somewhere else to stay. You can't just disappear like that. We went through a lot of trouble to set up that place for you." "Did you?" I asked quietly. "Or did you just want me out of your way?" "Mom, don't be dramatic. We did what was best for everyone. You're being unreasonable." Unreasonable. After 34 years of putting his needs before my own, after sacrificing my financial security to ensure his comfort, I was being unreasonable for not gracefully accepting my exile. "I have to go, David. I have an appointment." "An appointment? Mom, you can barely see. You shouldn't be going places alone." The concern in his voice might have fooled me once, but now I heard it for what it was. Worry about liability, not love. "I'll be fine. Goodbye, David." I hung up before he could respond. Tomorrow, I would meet with Robert and begin the process that would change everything. Tonight, I would mourn the relationship with my son that I'd apparently already lost years ago, without even realizing it. But for the first time in decades, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: anticipation. They thought they'd discarded a helpless old woman, but they were about to discover exactly what that helpless old woman had been holding up all these years. Robert's office hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same leather chairs, the same mahogany desk, even the same painting of a lighthouse on the wall behind him. But today, everything felt different. Today, I wasn't here as the devoted mother quietly managing her son's financial future. I was here as a woman who'd finally had enough. "Margaret, I have to ask one more time," Robert said, his gray eyes serious behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Are you absolutely certain about this? What you're proposing will have serious consequences." I adjusted my purse in my lap, feeling the weight of the house keys inside. Keys to a house that legally belonged to me, even though David's name was on the deed. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Robert spread the documents across his desk. Even with my limited vision, I could make out the official letterheads, the dense blocks of text that would soon turn my son's world upside down. "Let's review what we're dealing with," he said, putting on his reading glasses. "The house on Maple Street was purchased by you in 1989 for $127,000. You transferred the deed to David in 2007 as a gift, but under state law, you retained what's called a life estate. That means you have the legal right to live there for the rest of your life. And more importantly, you can revoke the transfer if certain conditions aren't met." "What conditions?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "The transfer was made with the understanding that you would be cared for and allowed to remain in the home. By forcibly removing you, David has violated the terms of the original gift. We can absolutely revoke it." My heart pounded. After all these years of being invisible, of letting others take credit for my contributions, I finally had power. Real, legal power. "What about the mortgage payments?" Robert flipped through another set of documents. "We have 15 years of bank records showing monthly transfers from your account to David's, specifically to cover the mortgage. We also have records of your co-signing agreements for his business loans, his vehicle loans, even the loan for Jessica's van. Legally speaking, you've been acting as an undisclosed benefactor. And if you stop, David will be responsible for all of those payments on his own. Based on his actual income versus his expenses, he'll default within 3 months. The gravity of it hit me. For 15 years, I'd been propping up a lifestyle that David couldn't actually afford. He thought he was successful, thought he was providing for his family, but it was all built on my hidden contributions. "There's something else," Robert continued, his voice gentle. "I've done some research into David's recent financial activity. It appears Jessica has been pressuring him to take out additional loans against the house. If they succeed, they could potentially leave you with nothing." My blood ran cold. "What kind of loans?" "A home equity line of credit. The paperwork was submitted last week. If it goes through, they'll have access to nearly $200,000 in equity that you built with your mortgage payments. So this wasn't just about getting rid of a burden. Jessica had been planning to cash in on the house value, probably figuring that once I was safely tucked away in a nursing home, no one would question their right to do whatever they wanted with David's property. "Stop the loan," I said firmly. "Do whatever you need to do to stop it. I can file an injunction immediately. As the true owner of the property, you have the right to block any liens or loans against it." I thought about David's voice on the phone yesterday, annoyed that I'd left the nursing home, irritated that I was being unreasonable. He had no idea that while he was worrying about my inconvenience to his life, his wife was planning to steal my life savings. "What else do I need to know?" Robert pulled out a thick folder. "I've prepared all the paperwork to revoke the property transfer and establish you as the legal owner again. I've also prepared documentation to stop all automatic transfers from your accounts. And Margaret," he paused, looking uncomfortable, "there's something else Jessica doesn't know." "What?" "The life insurance policy on your late husband, the one that paid for David's college education and helped you buy the house, it had a clause. If David ever abandoned or mistreated you, the remaining benefits would be reclaimed by the estate." I stared at him. Remaining benefits? There was $300,000 left in a trust fund that was supposed to go to David when he turned 40. He turned 40 last month, but given recent events, my son had thrown away a $300,000 inheritance for the sake of Jessica's manipulations. He'd chosen to see me as worthless instead of recognizing that I was the source of everything he had. "What do you need me to do?" Robert handed me a pen. "Sign here and here and here. Once these documents are filed, David will receive notice that the property transfer has been revoked. He'll also receive notice that all financial support is being terminated immediately." As I signed my name on each document, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Control. For too long, I'd let love make me invisible. I'd sacrificed my own security to protect David's pride, and he'd repaid me by throwing me away like garbage. How long before this takes effect? The property revocation will be filed today. David will receive official notice within 48 hours. The financial support termination is immediate. Your bank will stop all automatic transfers as of tomorrow. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "Thank you, Robert. For everything." "Margaret," he said as I reached the door, "are you sure you don't want to give David a chance to make this right? Maybe if you explain the situation?" I turned back to him, and for the first time in years, I smiled with real conviction. "Robert, I spent 15 years explaining my value through my actions. They chose not to see it. Now they'll learn to see my worth through my absence." Walking out of that office, I felt like I was walking toward a new life. Behind me lay decades of invisible sacrifice and unappreciated love. Ahead of me lay something I'd almost forgotten was possible, a future where I mattered. 3 days after signing the papers with Robert, I was sitting in my small apartment when my phone started ringing. It was barely 7 in the morning, but I'd been awake for hours, waiting. I knew the official notices would be delivered today, and I knew what would happen next. David's name flashed on my screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Hello, David." "Mom, what the hell is going on?" His voice was sharp, panicked. "I just got some legal papers saying you're taking back the house. This has to be some kind of mistake." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "It's not a mistake." "What do you mean it's not a mistake? This is my house. I've been paying the mortgage for years." The irony was almost funny. "Have you, David? Have you really been paying it?" "Of course I have. The money comes out of my account every month." "And where do you think that money comes from?" Silence. I could practically hear his brain working, trying to make sense of what I was implying. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "David, for the past 15 years, I've been transferring money into your account every month to cover that mortgage payment. You never qualified for a loan that size on your own. I co-signed, and I've been making the payments. That's..." His voice faltered. "That's impossible. I would have known." "Would you? When was the last time you actually looked at your bank statements? When was the last time you questioned why everything in your life worked out so perfectly?" The silence stretched longer this time. I could hear Jessica in the background, her voice shrill and demanding, asking what was happening. "Even if that's true," David said finally, "you can't just take the house back. We live here. Your grandchildren live here. I can, and I have. You made it very clear on Thanksgiving that I was no longer welcome in that house. You called me dead weight, David. Your wife said you couldn't afford to support a useless old woman anymore. Mom, we were just trying to do what was best for everyone." "No, you were doing what was easiest for you. There's a difference." Jessica's voice got louder in the background. I heard her snatching the phone away from David. "Margaret, this is ridiculous," she snapped. "You can't just steal our house because your feelings got hurt." "I'm not stealing anything." "Jessica, I'm taking back what was always mine. David's been paying for this house for years. You have no right." "Jessica, let me ask you something. How much do you think David actually makes from his landscaping business? That's none of your business." "It is when I've been subsidizing your lifestyle for over a decade. David brings in about $3,000 a month on average. Your mortgage payment is $1,847. Add in the truck payment, the equipment loans, your van payment, utilities, food, and all those shopping trips you love so much. Tell me, Jessica, how does the math work?" Another silence. Longer this time. "You're lying," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "Am I? Why don't you pull out your bank statements and trace where the mortgage money actually comes from? Better yet, check your account balance. You'll notice the automatic deposit stopped 3 days ago." I heard her gasp. followed by frantic whispering between her and David. David came back on the phone. Mom, if what you're saying is true, we can work something out. We just need to talk about this. There's nothing to work out, David. You made your choice when you threw me out like garbage. Now you'll live with the consequences. But where are we supposed to go? We have kids. That's the same question I asked myself when you kicked me out. Somehow, I figured it out. Jessica grabbed the phone again. You bitter old witch. You're doing this out of spite. No, Jessica. Spite would be doing this without warning. I'm giving you 30 days to find somewhere else to live. 30 days? We can't find a place in 30 days. That's more time than you gave me. I had to leave on a Thursday and you wanted me gone by Monday, remember? I could hear her hyperventilating. David, do something. She can't do this to us. But David had gone quiet. I suspected he was starting to understand the full scope of what was happening. He was probably remembering all those times he'd wondered how he managed to afford everything. All those times he'd felt proud of his financial success without quite understanding where it came from. Mom, he said, his voice smaller now. Can we meet? Can we talk about this face to face? We talked face to face on Thanksgiving, David. You told me I was a burden you couldn't afford to carry anymore. I was, Jessica said. Jessica said what? That your own mother was worthless? And you agreed with her. I heard Jessica in the background again, her voice rising to a near shriek. This is all your fault, David. You should have put her in a home years ago. Something inside me went cold. Years ago? Jessica, how long have you been planning to get rid of me? That's not what I meant. David, put me on speaker. Mom, I don't think... Put me on speaker, or I call Robert right now and tell him to expedite the eviction process. A moment later, I heard the hollow sound that indicated speakerphone. Jessica, I said, my voice deadly calm. I want you to listen very carefully. For 15 years, I have paid for the roof over your head, the car you drive, and the lifestyle you've enjoyed. I did it quietly, without recognition, because I loved my son and wanted to see him succeed. You repaid that generosity by convincing him to throw me away. Margaret, you don't understand the pressure we've been under. The only pressure you've been under is the pressure of maintaining a lifestyle you can't afford. Well, congratulations. That pressure is about to become very real. I heard her start to cry, but it sounded more like rage than sadness. David, I continued, you have 30 days to vacate my house. After that, I'll be moving back in. I suggest you use that time to figure out how you're going to manage your finances without me. Mom, please. I hung up before he could finish. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or sadness. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. I felt like I mattered. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. We'll fight this. You won't get away with destroying your own family. I texted back, I'm not destroying anything. I'm just stopping my part in building something that was never real. Then I blocked both their numbers. They'd had their chance to treat me with respect and love. Now they could learn to survive without the invisible support that had made their comfortable life possible. The hardest part was over. Now came the part I was actually looking forward to. 2 weeks had passed since the phone call, and I hadn't heard from David or Jessica. I'd expected more fight from them, more attempts to guilt me into changing my mind. The silence was almost unsettling. I was organizing my few belongings when there was a knock at my apartment door. Through the peephole, I could make out a familiar shape. David, standing alone. No Jessica beside him. No children as human shields. Just my son, looking smaller than I'd seen him in years. I opened the door slowly. He looked terrible. His usually neat hair was disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes looked like he'd slept in them. Hello, David. Mom. His voice was hoarse. Can I come in? I stepped aside, and he walked into my small living room like a man in a daze. He sat heavily on my couch, his head in his hands. I've been going through everything, he said without looking up. Bank statements, loan documents, everything. I never realized. I sat across from him in my armchair, waiting. The business loan for my equipment. You co-signed for that. The truck loan. You co-signed. Jessica's van. You co-signed. Even the credit cards we use for groceries. You're listed as a guarantor. Yes. And the mortgage payments? God, Mom, you've been paying our mortgage for 15 years. How did I not know? Because you never looked. You never questioned why everything always worked out for you financially. He finally looked up at me, and I could see tears in his eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently if you'd known? He started to answer, then stopped. We both knew the truth. Jessica would have found ways to justify taking my money while still treating me like a burden. She'd already proven that by trying to get me to pay for my own exile to a nursing home. Where is Jessica now? David's laugh was bitter. Gone. She left yesterday, took the kids and went to her mother's in Phoenix. Said she wasn't going to stick around for what she called financial ruin. I felt a stab of pain, not for Jessica, but for my grandchildren. They were innocent in all this. And now they were being dragged across the country because their mother couldn't face the consequences of her own actions. She cleaned out our joint account before she left, David continued. What little was in there. Anyway, turns out we've been living paycheck to paycheck for years, even with your help. Jessica was spending money we didn't have on things we didn't need. And now? Now I'm looking at losing everything. The business equipment will get repossessed if I can't make the payments. I'll have to close the company. I don't know where I'm going to live after the 30 days are up. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay. That was the mother in me, the part that had always fixed his problems and smoothed his path. But there was a new part of me now, a part that had learned the hard way what happened when love became enabling. David, why are you here? He looked at me with desperate eyes. I'm here to apologize. I'm here to beg you to forgive me for what I said, for what I did. And I'm hoping maybe we can work something out. Some kind of arrangement where I can keep the house and the business, and you can come back home where you belong. There it was. Even now, even after everything, he still thought this was about making a deal. He still didn't understand that this wasn't a negotiation. David, do you know what the hardest part of Thanksgiving dinner was for me? He shook his head. It wasn't being called dead weight. It wasn't even being thrown out of my own house. It was watching my son, the boy I raised, the man I've supported for his entire adult life, stand by and let his wife treat me like trash. You didn't just agree with her, David. You laughed. Jessica can be very persuasive. She'd been telling me for months that having you in the house was holding us back, that we needed to think about our future. Your future built on my sacrifices. I didn't know that then, but you know it now. And knowing it now, what would you do differently? He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. That was the most honest thing he'd said since walking through my door. David, I spent your entire life making sure you never had to struggle the way I did after your father died. I wanted you to feel successful, to feel capable, but somewhere along the way, I made you incapable of appreciating what you had. Mom, I do appreciate. No, you don't. If you appreciated it, you would never have thrown me away. If you appreciated it, you would have seen Jessica's behavior for what it was years ago. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the small parking lot below. Do you want to know what I've realized these past few weeks? What? I've realized that I was so afraid of being a burden that I made myself invisible. I gave and gave and gave, and I never asked for anything in return. Not money, not recognition, not even basic respect. And you know what that taught you? What? It taught you that my contributions had no value, that I had no value. David started crying then, really crying. Mom, I'm so sorry. I love you. I've always loved you. I believe you do love me, David. But love without respect isn't enough. Love without gratitude isn't enough. And love that disappears the moment it becomes inconvenient isn't love at all. What can I do? How can I make this right? I turned back to face him. You can learn to stand on your own 2 feet. You can learn to live within your means. You can learn to appreciate what you have instead of always wanting more. And then, maybe, when you've proven that you can value yourself without devaluing others, we can talk about rebuilding a relationship based on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. What about the house? I'm moving back in next week. You can visit, but only if you're ready to treat me like the woman who made your life possible. Not like the burden you convinced yourself I was. David stood up slowly. At the door, he turned back to me one more time. Mom, I really am sorry. I know you are, David. But sorry isn't enough anymore. Show me you've learned something from this, and maybe we can find our way back to each other. After he left, I sat in my chair and cried, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen myself, and it felt like coming home. 6 months later, I was sitting in my garden, in my house, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The coffee in my hands was perfect, the silence around me was peaceful, and for the first time in decades, I felt truly content. The house felt different now that it was truly mine again. I'd had the locks changed immediately, not out of spite, but out of necessity. This was my sanctuary now, and I controlled who entered it. I'd also made some changes that I'd always wanted but never felt entitled to make when David lived here. New curtains in colors I loved, a reading chair positioned perfectly by the window, and most importantly, I'd converted David's old bedroom into an art studio. At 68, I'd discovered painting. Who knew that fingers that had spent decades managing finances could create something beautiful? My vision might be limited, but I could still see colors, still feel the texture of paint on canvas. It was therapeutic in ways I never expected. My phone rang, interrupting my peaceful morning. David's name appeared on the screen. We talked now, about once a week, but our relationship was different. Rebuilding trust, I'd learned, was a slow process. Good morning, Mom. Good morning, sweetheart. I still called him that. But now it came from genuine affection rather than desperate hope. I wanted to let you know, I got the apartment, the one I told you about near downtown. It's small, but it's clean, and I can afford it on my own. David had spent the past 6 months learning what it meant to live within his actual means. After losing the landscaping business, he'd taken a job with the city's parks department. The pay was steady, if modest, and for the first time in his adult life, he was managing his finances without hidden help from anyone. That's wonderful, David. I'm proud of you. It's weird, being proud of something so basic as paying my own rent, but it feels good. It feels real. Real accomplishments usually do. He'd also been going to therapy, something Jessica had always mocked but that I'd encouraged. Learning to understand how he'd gotten so comfortable being subsidized, how he'd rationalized treating me poorly, had been painful but necessary work. Any word from Jessica? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She filed for divorce last month. She's already engaged to someone else, some guy her mother introduced her to. Apparently he's financially stable. The bitterness in his voice was fading, replaced by something that sounded like relief. And the children? This was always the hardest part. My grandchildren were growing up in Arizona, and I missed them terribly. But David was working on rebuilding his relationship with them too, planning to move closer to them once he'd saved enough money. Emma lost her first tooth last week. She told me on our video call that she wants to save the tooth fairy money to help me buy a bigger house. His voice cracked slightly. She's 7 years old, Mom, and she's worried about helping me financially. I've messed up so badly. You're fixing it, David. That's what matters now. I know you probably won't want to, but would you like to say hello to them on our next call? They ask about you sometimes. My heart swelled. I'd love that. After we hung up, I walked through my house, appreciating every room. The kitchen where I'd made countless meals for an ungrateful family was now where I experimented with recipes just for myself. The living room where I'd been insulted and dismissed was now where I hosted my book club, a group of intelligent, interesting women I'd met at the community center. The dining room where I'd been told I was worthless was now where I had dinner parties with my new friends, women who valued my conversation, who appreciated my wit, who never made me feel like I needed to prove my worth. I'd learned something important in these months alone. I was good company. I was interesting. I was valuable, not for what I could provide others, but for who I was as a person. It had taken 68 years to discover this, but better late than never. My neighbor Carol knocked on my back door around noon. She was a widow like me, though her children lived nearby and visited regularly. She'd become a dear friend. and I treasured our daily conversations. "Margaret, you'll never guess what I just heard at the grocery store," she said, settling into the chair across from me at the kitchen table. "What's that?" "That awful woman who used to live here with your son. Someone saw her at the mall, arguing with some man about money. Apparently, her new relationship isn't going as smoothly as she'd hoped." I shook my head. "That's unfortunate, but not surprising. Jessica never learned to appreciate what she had." "You're too kind, Margaret, after what she put you through. Holding on to anger would only hurt me." "Carol, Jessica is living with the consequences of her choices. That's punishment enough." That evening, I was in my art studio, working on a landscape painting, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery man with a large bouquet of flowers. The card read, "Mom, thank you for teaching me that real strength comes from standing on your own. Love, David." I smiled, placing the flowers in a vase on my kitchen table. It had taken losing everything for David to understand what truly mattered, but he was learning. We both were. As I settled into bed that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of that Thanksgiving dinner felt like a lifetime ago, even though it had only been 6 months. I'd lost a son who'd never truly valued me, and gained a son who was learning to be worthy of my love. More importantly, I'd found myself. The woman who had spent decades invisible, unappreciated, and taken for granted was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth, who demanded respect, and who chose her own happiness over everyone else's comfort. I'd thought that being discarded by my family was the end of my story. Instead, it had been the beginning of my real life. Tomorrow, I would wake up in my own house, make my own choices, and live for my own joy. And that, I'd discovered, was worth more than all the forced gratitude and hollow appreciation in the world. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be valued by others. I'd learned that the most important person to value me was myself. And finally, beautifully, I did. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.